Morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lakshmi. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I have had the pleasure of spending the last couple of weeks with this reading and really contemplating that concept of what it means to seek God in inner silence, in the silence of love, and ultimately in the silence of our own soul. And the conclusion that I came to is this question that is posed to us this week: what is the best way to worship? Is such an essential question for all of us on this path and for any spiritual seeker, because what it demands is that we examine the inner longing of our own heart. It demands that we're asking that question: how closely am I keeping God with me? How authentically am I serving God in everything that I do? And if we expand that out and think about the concept of, am I worshiping God in every breath, in every thought, in every desire? When I'm drawn out into the world, as we are on a daily basis, am I remembering to bring God into the circumstances and realizing that the divine is behind all of those circumstances, good and bad, that happen to us? Am I seeing God in every person with whom I interact? And ultimately, until we get to that place where we are realizing that the divine present permeates every atom of creation, that God is ever present, this is what our reading is demanding of us, or I should say asking of us. This is what true worship is. It's an opportunity to offer ourselves completely into that reality that we are one with God. It is Sanatan Dharma. Just as our reading shows us that God brought different religions to earth in order to appease the different inclinations and characteristics and tendencies that we have, the underlying truth of all religion is Sanatan Dharma. It is that reality that we are extensions of the divine, as close to God and a part of God in the same way that we consider our arms and our legs and our toes to be a part of our body. There is no separation between them. And that life force that exists, that divine life force that flows through us, permeates all of creation. And of course, what our reading talks about is that the best place to seek this is in meditation. That's why we have our Gita reading: sequestered should he sit, steadfastly meditating, solitary. It is because devotion is cultivated within. It is not necessarily an action, but it is a state of being that manifests outwardly in the world. And we can see that in this temple and temples around the world, in every religion. But it starts from within our own heart. And we cultivate this in that silence and in that stillness. Paramhansa Yogananda said, I was watching a talk that Jyotish gave on this topic last year, and he said something that I had never heard before but struck me. He said that Paramhansa Yogananda said, the true altar is not in any church. It is within our central nervous system. And what he's talking about is Kriya Yoga, the highest form of meditation we offer. What he's talking about is that ability to withdraw from the outer senses of the world, to withdraw from that constant cyclical nature of the mind that's always asking us, what if I just had this? Or, well, what do I have to do today? Sitting in meditation in the morning thinking, when is this over so I can get to work and do all the things I have to do? But if we can just withdraw and bring all of that energy in, turning it up to the point between the eyebrows, to the place of Christ consciousness. This is the place where authenticity is cultivated. Because what else do we want to do but sit in front of God and offer ourselves to Him? This is the only way to worship. It manifests outwardly in all different forms, but it has to start within our own heart. And meditation is how we can do this. And we know that because we practice it. You can feel that. However, I was thinking about the fact that meditation for most of us is just one small part of our day, and that most of the day we're out in the world. We're working, we're caring for our families, we're interacting with our friends. And so how do we cultivate this same feeling of worship? How do we bring all of that energy with us into our daily lives? And the link between them is our devotion. It's that ability to bring your devotion into everything that you are doing. I was speaking with a friend yesterday, and of course this topic came up, and she was talking about what it takes to put on a Sunday service. and between the musicians and the ministers and the light bearers and the Sunday refreshment service, the ushers, the point person, everyone who comes together to collectively create our Sunday worship service. Just on a logistical level, it takes over 30 people to make this happen. And that doesn't include everyone who came up and sang for us today. That doesn't include the decades of meditation and prayer that have happened in this building, the transformation of this building from a Catholic church into our expression of the divine, or the decades of meditation and prayer and planning that went into creating the Ananda vibration in general. That all of that is a part of what we're experiencing right now. And the upliftment that you feel when you come to a Sunday service is a combined result of the individual devotion that every person is bringing to what they are doing. That when we're putting bagels out on the table, we're putting them out as if God were coming to eat with us. Because the reality is, He is. God is right here in every single one of us. That when we're lighting candles on the altar, we're not just thinking about getting a job done, but we're thinking about what that means, lighting the inner light of our soul, the burning desire that we have to bring ourselves closer and closer to God. And that when we can cultivate this type of devotion and we can bring that into everything that we do, we are in a state of active worship. Everything that we do on a daily basis can bring us closer and closer to the divine. The last thing that my friend said when we were talking about this is she said that Sunday worship service is a collective prayer. And I thought that that was such a beautiful way to look at it, because it absolutely is. And that doesn't just include the people who have specific roles or tasks that they're doing. It includes every single one of you. It includes the devotion that you bring, the motivation that you have to come and sit down and offer yourself to the divine. And that everything we feel is a product of that combined individual yearning of the heart to return to God. And this is the best way to worship. This is the answer to our question that we have this week. I'll tell you a story about Seva. Seva is worshipful service. It's service to the Guru or to our own highest self. And one of the activities that I used to do for about 2 years is I would set up the outdoor fire ceremony. And the outdoor fire ceremony is such a devotional process. It's not something that we do every week just because it's a part of the service. It's something that we do to cultivate that inner devotion for every individual person. And just like we do it here, and everyone's lifting the energy up and energetically casting it into the fire, when we're doing the fire ceremony outside, each individual devotee gets to take rice, and they're actually spiritualizing that rice, bringing it up the astral spine and casting it into the fire. They're drawing all of their karma, all of their yearning and love for God, and they're casting it into the fire for transformation. They're offering themselves. And so part of the task that we have at the end of the fire ceremony, so you have to hold that piece because it becomes important later. Part of the task that we have when we are cleaning up the fire ceremony after extinguishing the fire and putting everything away is to clean up the extra rice. Because we live on the material plane, not all of the rice makes it into the fire pit, and one of our jobs is to sweep up that rice. And I began this process for the first 6 months or so, simply sweeping up the rice. It was step 1, step 2, step 3, get it all done so you can come inside and meditate. The quicker you can do it, the more time you have to meditate. And that was the process that I went through. And then one day I was sweeping, and I realized that what I was sweeping up was the devotion of my Guru Bhai. It was the longing and the yearning for God that the people I respect and care about most in this world were sharing and offering. And that if I brought that intention, if I brought that level of worship into the act of cleaning it up, it became a spiritual process. I could be a channel of God collecting the stray karma that got stuck or got left behind, and I had the opportunity to channel God and throw it away. The process was still the same because we're on the material plane, but what I was doing, the transformation that happened for me in that process, it became my favorite part of Sunday. In fact, we're about to start the season with the fire ceremony, and we need people who will start cleaning it up. So let me just say, it's my favorite part of Sundays. That was not planned. That is not a pitch. But that idea of being able to bring our devotion into everything that we're doing, to bring God in, inviting God into that moment. Where can I find him? How close am I holding him? Because if we just go through the day in our daily actions, most of the time they're benign, but we can go for hours and forget, oh yeah, I'm a devotee. I'm here to serve God in every moment and in every aspect. This was a story also that Jyotish shared for those of you that were up at Inner Renewal Week or watched the talks at Inner Renewal Week this year in February. They focused on the 3 pillars of spiritual community, and they were sadhana, which is meditation, seva, which is service, and attunement, which is bringing ourselves closer and closer to the will of God, to the will of our guru. And the other day I was watching the talk on seva again, and of course, because of the book that Jyotish is writing, he was very passionate about the topic of seva. And one of the stories that he told is the story of the Ananda Charitable Trust, or the Yogananda Charitable Trust, which is a work in Vrindavan, for those of you that are unfamiliar. There's a group of mostly devotees and disciples now who work with widows in Vrindavan. Oftentimes in India, when a woman is widowed, they're cast out on the street and they don't have anywhere to go. And so they make their way to Vrindavan, and the Yogananda Charitable Trust gives them food and shelter and medical care on a material level, but also feeds the soul with community, with spirituality, with belonging and purpose. And Jyotish was talking about his experience. He and Devi had just come back from a trip to India and had met many of the employees who were working there. He said there were about 90 employees, and when they'd started the program a year earlier, none of the employees were devotees, or at least very few were devotees. But over the course of that year, at least a third of the people involved in that organization had become devotees of Yogananda and were either on the path toward Kriya or had received Kriya initiation. And he focused on the transformation that happened as a result of this infusion of devotion into the process, or into the community where they were working, the employment. And now this happened to be devotees of Yogananda. But again, as we hear in our reading, it's not about whether or not you are a devotee of this particular path, but it's the ability to cultivate devotion. It's the ability to cultivate that yearning, that longing for God, being able to bring God into everything that we do, so that we're not serving another person, another human being. It's God serving God. It's bringing us closer to that place where we know for certain that we are one with everything in creation. Just like we heard in our chants today and in the songs, the song that we sung, that idea that we are one with everyone and everything. And so that brings really a beautiful responsibility to all of us. It's a joy to think of that, but it's also a responsibility. And I was thinking about the phrase, God reads the heart. It's a phrase that we use often here at Ananda. And most of the time we're using it because we've made a mess of things in some way. And so we can say with a sigh of relief, well, it's okay. God reads the heart. No matter what kind of blunder I've created, my intention was pure. My desire was good. But I was thinking about that phrase, and if we shift the focus, not from the action that God is giving, God reads the heart, but we shift that to our responsibility. God reads the heart. It is our responsibility to purify and cleanse our desires. And what that means is constantly bringing ourselves back to a place where we are serving God, where we are looking to move in the direction of God. It doesn't mean being perfect. It means always moving closer and closer toward the divine. And this is a story that I wanted to share. One of the last stories that I will share with you today is an example of a student that I have who isn't perfect, but he was able to cultivate that desire and that passion to be better, or better in his mind. So for those of you that don't know, I'm a high school English teacher as well as the conflict mediator at a local school, which means that for most of my day, I'm with students who aren't their best selves. They've gotten in a fight, they're angry, they're aggressive, and they come in and we talk about the process of empathy, we talk about the ability to transform themselves, and then ultimately have a conversation and come to reconciliation with others. And I have a student who I have seen several times, at least on a monthly basis, if not every other week. Not always for physical altercations, but often for fights, for yelling, for anger. He's an extremely angry young man. And in the material world and the circumstances that he's had, he has what we would call reason to be angry. But what's beautiful about him is that he's constantly trying to be better. He sits in my office, or he sits with the other administrative principal with whom he has a good relationship, and he always says, I want to be better. I know I can be better. I know I'm not this angry person. I can feel it. And we're always encouraging him and helping him to navigate that process. What happens when we lose our temper? How can we transform? Our employee and was suspended for 5 days, which is the maximum amount of time that a student can be suspended. And he was in my office while the paperwork was being processed and we were waiting to release him from the school. And he was distraught. He couldn't stop crying, and he kept putting his hands in his head, other way around, his head in his hands, and saying, I can't believe I did this again. I don't deserve to be with her. His girlfriend, for the context, was not an angry person, and he was always trying to be better for her. And so to lose control in front of her was really heartbreaking for him. And he kept saying, I can't believe this. I don't deserve any of this. I don't deserve anyone. I'm an awful person, and just down and spinning and spiraling. And when he'd calmed down, I asked him why he wanted to be better. I asked him what it meant to be different in his mind, what it meant to be better. And his response was beautiful. His response was, because I'm not this anger. I can feel that I'm something else. I can feel that I'm something more, and I want to be something different, but I can't help it. I always come back to this place. And then he went on and he put his hand in his head and said, I'm just not worth it. And I stopped him. And I said, the mere fact that you know you want to be better, the mere fact that you can see you are something else, means that you are infinitely worth it, means that you have all the control and the ability to transform your life. And he didn't quite believe me in that moment, but I can say in the past month I haven't seen him since, that he is working at being better, in his mind, what better means. And the reason I share this story is because it comes back to that reality of the authenticity of the heart. Everything that we do is about moving ourselves progressively closer and closer to God. Every pronoun that we make, every prayer that we say is important. It is heard, it is felt. That's what Shanti was saying right before we began our meditation today, that every call to the divine is heard and is embraced and is loved. God is loved. God is our greatest champion. God is with us and always wanting us to do our best, to move forward and to come closer and closer to him. He knows our truth, and he smiles every time we recognize it. But those acts of devotion, the pronams, the prayers, the meditations in the temple, the Sunday worship services, the collaborative prayers that we create, they're fruitless unless they are born from that place of internal longing for God. This is worshiping God in spirit and in truth. This is seeking God in the silence of our own soul. It is our ability to come back to that place of knowing everything I do, every breath I take, every step forward in my life is about bringing me closer and closer to that place where I know I am with God. The last thing that I'll leave you with, I was just thinking about the prayer, God, 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 or the poem, and how in the very end of this poem, God brings us to that place of complete immersion into him, of complete submersion in the divine. Actually, this is why you have pockets, so that you can have the last verse. In waking, eating, working, dreaming, sleeping, serving, meditating, chanting, divinely loving, my soul will constantly hum, unheard by any, God, God, God. Devotion is cultivated from that place of silence within us. It doesn't have to be boisterous calls to God. It does not have to be ostentatious shows of devotion. Well, of course, those are welcomed by God. What he's really looking for is that silent call within our heart, that internal yearning to be closer and closer to him. And whether we find that in the stillness of meditation, or we're able to carry that into every moment of our life, if we interact with every moment of our existence as an offering to God, if we're giving ourselves, we're giving everything that we have back into the divine, then we are living in a state of active worship. We are living in a state of bringing God back to us until our soul hums constantly, unheard by any, God, God, God.